Hello and welcome to Faith Matters, the show where we take a spiritual perspective on Merseyside life. And our studio guest today is Helen Roberts, who's a practising pagan.
Practising, I like that term. I haven't got it right yet.
Okay, Helen, it's lovely to have you in the studio today. And can you tell us and tell our viewers, what is paganism exactly?
A really broad term, and that would describe anybody who has not maybe a monotheistic view of life. So gods are everywhere, and you could talk about people who worship nature, or people who have no gods but still revere nature and see in the divine in nature. It could be people who follow the northern gods, so Odin, Thor. It could be people who follow Greek gods or the Roman gods, so you could have the Mithra cult, somebody who was born of a virgin, was put to death around about the time of the winter solstice, and
Right, okay.
was
I see
born
where you're
again.
going with that,
Yeah. Just to tie us into something later on. So it's a really broad church, if you'll excuse the pun,
No, I can excuse
of
that,
people who say certainly not monotheistic. There'll be lots of gods or no gods, but definitely being part of nature, being one with nature, and certainly not the most important part of nature.
Right, okay, so not the kind of crown of creation?
No.
Okay, right. And is there a common thread running through the various traditions in paganism, would you say? If there is, what is it?
Possibly now. I would imagine that when paganism was, so pre-Christian times, I would imagine that paganism was, well, it wouldn't have been called paganism then. I think pagan generally is thought to mean as a country dweller, a country person. So they would have been very disparate groups, worshipping very disparate things. But if we think of, say, the Romans, when the Romans came to Britain, it was pre-Christian times, and they had their gods. And when they came to Britain, the different tribes had their gods. And Roman soldiers came over and said, we like that God. We're going to worship that God as well. And some of the British people would say, we like your God. We're going to have one of those as well.
So just kind of add a god to your pantheon of gods.
Exactly, yes. Yeah, so it's just like having friends, people that you can speak to, people that you can appeal to, or spirits that you can appeal to. But I would say that the thing that ties us together now is it's about being one with nature. First, do no harm is one of the things. So as long as you're not hurting anybody or hurting anything, it goes. So there's nothing about being gay or men or women. Everybody is exactly the same. It's about being part of nature.
And of course animals.
Exactly.
And everything is equal.
So yes, so an animal has the right to eat me.
Right, okay.
Because I'm not more important than it. But I also have the right to try and stop it doing that.
Right, okay. So how long have you been a pagan?
That's a really, really interesting question. I would say when I was about 7, I was raised a Catholic, a Roman Catholic. When I was about 7, I went to my priest, our parish priest, who was a lovely, lovely priest, Father English, and I said, can I be an altar boy? And he said, no, you can't be an altar boy, you're a girl. And I said, I know, but can I be an altar boy? What difference does it make if I'm a girl?
An altar girl.
Yeah, there was no such thing in those days. I'm talking a long time ago, don't push it. And he said, well, if you're a girl, your hair might drip in the altar wine.
Right.
So I said, that's okay, I'll cut it, I'll tie it back. And he said, well, it could get caught in the flames of the candles. I said, I'll cut it short. And he said, Helen, you can't, you're a girl. And I remember looking round and thinking, so you don't really want me here then. Also, I'll blame long family holidays in Anglesey, the Isle of Mona, which was very sacred to the Druids. And I remember being in, we stayed on a farm and there was this little woodland place, and I remember going there and just being suddenly absorbed in the energy of the place. And I didn't feel it was the God that I knew. I felt it was a different sort of energy, I just felt all these spirits whispering at me. And
did you hear them audibly?
Not saying anything, but you just knew that they were around, not necessarily speaking to me. I remember that there was a flock of long-tailed tits that came in, and they were all sort of swooping around, not around me, around the trees, and you just felt that there was this buzz of energy going around, and that I was part of that, and that had a very long-lasting impression on me.
Was it actually a holy site, that? Did you then, in terms of the earth tradition?
Not as far as I know. Who knows? Because the Romans decimated it, if using a Roman expression, decimated it after the revolt, after the Boudica revolt. So they took down all the oak groves and things like that.
So, in adulthood, when did you actually embrace paganism as a kind of way of life, or did you just slip into it, or was it like a conversion process, or?
Not a conversion process, but just as anybody with an inquiring mind, you're looking around and you're thinking, this doesn't suit me. I feel a bit like a square peg in a round hole here. I don't want to knock off the edges. I'd rather explore other things. And I remember reading some books by a woman called Manda Scott. She's a historic writer. And she wrote this series about Boudica. And within that, there's a lot of paganism, because, of course, there would be at that time. And I just remember thinking, this is a lot more like it. This is a lot more like me. And through that, started exploring it through that.
And so is there a book, is there an equivalent book to the Bible or the Quran, or are there books, holy books within paganism? No.
And in fact, very interesting. I went on a course, a dreaming course. It was almost like meditation, but then sort of taking yourself beyond that. And in the morning there was a sort of a ceremony, and it was about sort of looking at the four directions and looking at the different elements, the earth, the wind, all that sort of thing. And when we went back inside, somebody said, can I just write down? I haven't got it all. I want to just write down exactly what we did. And the person who led it said, oh, no. If you write it down, that becomes the right way to do it. And somebody else is doing it the wrong way. What you do is you remember what was right for you, and then you add bits that will make it more personal to you. As soon as we start writing it down, we get right and wrong. And they said, well, again, that's just not the way to go. So I thought that was very interesting. So there's no set of rules. Do no harm. That's about it.
Okay. So how do you practice your faith? Do you call it faith, or?
No, I'd call it more of a way of life, spirituality.
Yeah.
I don't know if you can call it a religion if there aren't a set of rules to follow.
Yeah.
It's always about being open to possibilities of listening to the world around you. I might be walking down the road and I've been thinking about a problem, and suddenly something like a crows will fly past and they'll all start cawing, and I'll think, okay, yeah. That reminds me I need to be more grounded. I need to be more. So it's about listening to nature. Going into the supermarket and looking at it and trying to work out, this is organic, but it came from Egypt. This is local, but it's not organic. Which do I choose? Which is going to do the least harm? So that's kind of how you practice it. I have an evening ceremony that I do, but it's just very personal to me. Nobody else would recognise it, but it reminds me to be small.
So you don't kind of go out to the woods, I don't want to stereotype it, but you don't go out to the woods with other pagans and perform rituals? And
Sometimes, and there are various times in the year where that's more important. So the year might begin with Samhain, which is the time around Halloween. So that's about ancestor worship, so reminding us to think of all those people, either spirit ancestors or blood ancestors, all those people who have gone before. I remember a lovely phrase that I heard, and I can't remember the person who did it, and it was, I'm paraphrasing, I'm walking through woodland, and suddenly I notice the world around me, and a voice says to me, stop and listen. You are the result of the love of thousands. And I just thought, what a fantastic way to remember your ancestors. So that would be Samhain, and then you've got Yule, which is the shortest day.
And that's around the same time as Christmas time.
About the same time as Christmas time. And then you've got one.
Is that a festival of light in the same way Christmas and Hanukkah are at the same time of year?
Yeah.
So it's kind of
yes, and I love the way that all sorts of different religions seem to be linked in these ways of trying to find our way through, and trying to find our way through in the most peaceable way.
Yeah, I mean, we'll come to this in the second half, but people have said that it was generally thought that Christians pinched this stuff from the that the whole light and dark thing and adapted it in a way. You think that's true? From the original.
That seems a little cold and calculating to me. Yeah. It's not as if Christians arrived from a different planet they would have been people who were now exploring a different God. So everybody's had their gods. Now they have this God. So it would have been natural for them. Also living in a time when it was really important to be grateful that you had survived the winter, and to be welcoming in the fact that the days were getting lighter, because it meant that you had lived through that. So nature would have been far more important in any case. So I think a lighting of fires and candles and all those sorts of things are a very human way for us to explore these things.
Well, thanks, Helen. We're going to go to our commercial break now, and then when we come back, we're going to talk more about religion and the compatibility between paganism and mainstream religion. So join us after the break for Faith Matters. Welcome back to Faith Matters. We're in the studio with Helen Roberts and we're discussing paganism today. Helen, you said that you didn't think that paganism was a religion, you personally. Is that right?
I personally don't think it's a religion. I think it's more of a spirituality or a way of life. It's a hard one, but say there's no set rules to follow. And it's such as I say, a broad spectrum of people.
But are there any pagans who would consider it to be a religion, do you think?
Yes, I would say that there are people who would argue it, and good luck to them.
Yeah, okay.
What would you say was a religion as opposed to a spirituality?
Well, that's a good question. For me, religion tends to be it's more of an institutional word.
Right. Well,
so as a Christian, I would prefer to call myself a follower of Jesus, and I'm increasingly using that term. But I'll come to that in a moment. How does paganism, as a set of traditions, disciplines, how does it relate, do you think, to mainstream religion? Is there any dialogue going on that you know of, that you're involved in?
I would suggest that it's the Christian God is a God amongst a lot of other gods. So there would be no problem with the fact that some people worship that God. I know that sometimes he's called the jealous God because he doesn't like to think that anybody else is around.
Right,
but
okay.
He's a very powerful God, and so he's around. And so no, I don't see any difficulty with some people being pagans and some people being Christians or Baha'i or Zoroastrians. It's just the rich tapestry of life, and it just adds to the colour, I think.
And are people getting together to discuss this between the various mainstream religions?
I think more and more people are becoming open to possibilities, and I think more and more, thankfully, people are looking at how religions are alike and how we are alike more than how they're different. Enjoying how they're different as opposed to opposing how they're different. So I think that is something that's happening. There'll always be people who prefer things very rigidly, but soften those edges and we'll get on a lot better.
Rigid pagans?
Yes, I think there are people who would like to think that the paganism that they are celebrating is the same as the paganism that was pre-Christian, but we have no idea. We have some Roman writings and things like that, but written from a certain perspective. And how can we possibly know? Nothing was written down. The Druids didn't write things down. They were very clear about that. So how can we know? We can only do it from our modern perspective and try to make our way through our lives with the best we can.
Well, I think it's interesting because that's true of Celtic Christianity.
Yes.
That, there's a lot of books being written on Celtic Christianity, but not a lot of it is actually rooted in historical documents because like you said, it wasn't written down. Yeah. But we know with the Celtic cross, which is the cross of Christ inside a circle, that is actually a combination, a fusion of a very pagan symbol, the circle. Circle of life, and with the cross of Christ. And there was that period of assimilation here on these islands that the early Celtic church.
Yes.
Do you think that the church came and dominated the pagans, or do you think there was a meeting of ways?
I think probably to start off with, there was a meeting of ways, and then it's almost like a political party that gets a bit of power and enjoys it. Was it the synod of something like 694 or something like that?
Whitby, was it
Whitby, that's
Yeah.
the one, where they just tried to go, but was it the Roman Church or was it the Celtic Church? And they chose the Roman Church, and then I think we got into the patriarchy of it. So it was women weren't allowed to celebrate the Mass anymore, and I think that just quietly sort of eroded that meeting of minds, if you like. It became them and us then, and any power that women had was seen as dangerous. And of course, women were often the Druids were men as well as women, shamans were men as well as women, and that suddenly became, you can't have that. And I think that was a parting of the ways, unfortunately.
And did the persecution of the witches come from that, do you think?
I think so, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, because mind you, see, men were persecuted as witches as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, anything that said that you were able to make things happen in a way that wasn't to do with priests who had the rule.
Had the power.
Had the power, yeah, was dangerous. And I suppose that's a political thing as well as a spiritual thing. But we're getting past that, aren't we?
Well, there's been a huge, you probably know, there's been a huge revival in Celtic Christianity over the last 20 years.
Yeah.
You know, I've been affected by it myself, you know, and taken a lot of it on board. And do you think that relates to what you were saying about, you know, this listening, that people are listening to one another and looking for the best in...
Yes. Yes, and it's almost as if it's gone full circle.
Yeah.
So there you go, that circle of life again, where we've gone back to, yes, we're different religions living in this, different religions, different ways of life, different spiritualities, living on this small island, living globally, and how can we best get along together? What's the best of yours? What's the best of mine? I think there are far more people now who cherry pick. I don't see anything wrong with that, as long as you are living a life as honourably as you can.
And that renunciation of patriarchy as well would be key to that, which you're touching on.
Yes, let women do some of the work as well.
Absolutely.
Take some of the stress away.
Yeah.
But when you think about, you know, how it's going on to some different subject, you know, men dying earlier than women, is that necessarily all to do about testosterone being a difficult hormone to live with, or is it because all the responsibility, all the stress is put onto men, and women can take some of that off you as well?
Okay, what do you think of Jesus? I was thinking, you know, as I was preparing to meet you today and interview you today, Jesus took, you know, virtually all his examples from the natural environment, from, you know, the parables were natural stories, nature stories, if you like. You know, what's your take on Jesus as a person, as a teacher, as a kind of model?
Who wouldn't follow his ways? You know, who wouldn't read that and think that he was either a very good person, or that he was, you know, a manifestation of God, a God on this earth, and who wouldn't think to themselves that is a good way to live your life? But I think of the parable, well, the saying where he said, God clothes the birds, clothes the sparrows, and a low little sparrow, so he'll look after you as well. So, and that echoes with us in that everything is important, everything has a right to life, everything has its energy that needs as supporting as much as anybody else's.
And so, do you read the Gospels yourself at all?
Well, I was raised as a Catholic, so yes, I went to Mass every Sundays and holy days.
Stuck in there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, interesting. Now, a lot of Christians actually, would be worried about paganism in some way, that may be associated with occultism or devil worship. And I mean, it's not the first time you've heard this, I'm sure. And then it becomes quite accusatory.
Yes.
How would you respond to them? To that?
Well, it's that them and us thing again, isn't it? You know, you wouldn't want to be part of these people because devil worship, things like that. Well, there is a horned God. And I suppose that's where the devil comes in with his horns and his tail, because it would be part animal, part human. But pagans don't have a devil. We don't think of devils. So, and we don't think of the Christian God. So how could we be devil worshipping if we don't believe in a devil? I remember working with somebody, and when they found, because it's not something, I've kind of outed myself here, and they said, "You're a pagan, because don't they sacrifice babies?" And I remember saying, yeah, me and the women's hospital, we've got a thing going on, you know, if there's any that they want to get rid of, I'll take one off. And I thought, really? Seriously? have a very exciting life apparently in some people's imaginations.
Yeah.
But dancing naked round stones is really hard on the feet. You know, it would have to be in wellies in our environment, wouldn't it? So,
Yeah.
so no, the occult is something very, very different, and there are people who use that, but that's not me. First, do no harm.
So occultism, Satanism, that kind of thing, something very, very different, really.
Occultism maybe, but Satanism, because if you don't have a Satan, how can you be worshipping Satan if you don't believe in him or it?
Right, interesting. Thanks for clarifying that. And so how can people get involved? How can they find out more?
I would Google it in that new verb that we have, and be open to things, but also go along and think, is this bit for me? Because as I say, there's so many different ways to celebrate it. There are so many different groups. There's the Lightworkers Liverpool group. That seems a really interesting group. And they do all sorts of things around yoga and things like that as well. But go along with an open mind and just decide whether it's for you or not, because there's groups everywhere, and it's like going into a cafe and thinking, I like this cafe, I like the vibe. You go into another cafe and you don't like it, so find somewhere that's welcoming and then take it from there.
And it's the Pagan Federation, they have a website, don't they?
They do, yes.
And that gives you all the information on
it does,
the various streams and where you can connect.
And then you've got the British Druid Order, so that's an interesting as one, but the Druids work very hard, and that's too much like hard work for me. Or you got shamans as well, but again, that's a lot of hard work. So I'm quite happy to be a pagan and just enjoying life and letting other people do that hard work.
Well, Helen, thank you so much for coming on
pleasure.
today. It's been great to meet you and to find out that you're not scary at all.
Aww.
And not that I thought you would be. And but great, and thanks very much. And thanks for watching, and join us again for Faith Matters.